In this video, we're uncovering 5 chilling stories of owners who met their untimely deaths at the hands or paws of their own pets. From animals once seen as loyal companions to sudden and shocking fatal attacks, these disturbing cases will leave you questioning just how well we really know our furry, feathered, or scaly friends. Join us as we explore the darker, more unsettling side of pet ownership, where love turns lethal.
A County man found with a snake around his neck last week has now died from his injuries. 27-year-old Elliot Senseman died yesterday as a result of what officials call asphyxiation by constriction.
It started as an ordinary afternoon in Fogelsville, Pennsylvania. Quiet, uneventful, the kind of day that never hints at tragedy. But inside one small home, a horrifying scene was unfolding that would leave even seasoned officers shaken. 27-year-old Elliot Senseman, a lifelong reptile enthusiast and rescuer, was fighting for his life against a creature he had dedicated his life to saving. Elliot wasn't a reckless thrill-seeker. He'd been handling snakes since he was 10 years old, a man who knew their temperaments, their needs, their dangers. Friends and family described him as patient, gentle, and deeply compassionate. He had spent years taking in neglected reptiles, nursing them back to health, and giving them the care that others had denied them. To him, snakes weren't monsters. They were misunderstood. But one of those snakes would turn that belief into a nightmare. That day, Elliot entered the enclosure of an 18-foot boa constrictor, a snake that had been mistreated in its previous home and was known to be aggressive. He wasn't trying to handle it, just checking the setup, making sure it was safe. But in a terrifying instant, the massive reptile lunged and coiled itself around his neck. Its power was unimaginable muscle tightening, breath disappearing. Within seconds, the predator's instincts took over, and Elliot was trapped in a deadly embrace. When police arrived just after 2 p.m., the scene was almost too shocking to process. Elliot lay on the floor, unconscious, the snake's thick body wound tightly around him. Officers had only seconds to act. According to reports, the creature was so massive that it covered half the room. One officer raised his weapon, aimed carefully, and fired a single shot into the snake's head. Only then could they pull Elliot free and begin CPR. Paramedics rushed him to Lehigh Valley Hospital, but the damage had already been done. The boa's crushing grip had cut off oxygen to his brain. After several days in critical condition, Elliot passed away. The coroner's report confirmed the cause: anoxic brain injury due to asphyxiation by constriction, death by the very animal he'd tried to protect. His mother, Heather, later spoke through heartbreak. "My son was unique and kind and should still be with his family," she said. She explained that the snake was still in rehabilitation, too aggressive to be rehomed, and that Elliot was only trying to care for it safely. He was experienced and would never handle that snake alone, she said. He just wanted these animals to live in conditions as close to their natural habitats as possible. Family members recalled that the boa had been abused and malnourished before Elliot took it in. They said it had never behaved normally, describing the final attack as unusually violent, more like a predator in panic than a pet in distress. For Elliot, who had always believed in the goodness of the animals he saved, that moment must have been beyond comprehension. The police report detailed a haunting image of a man devoted to saving reptiles, felled by one he'd sworn to protect. Even officers, hardened by years of service, admitted they had never seen anything like it. The snake's massive body, the silence of the room, the desperate attempt to save a life that was already slipping away. Elliot's death was ruled a tragic accident, but it raised chilling questions about the line between compassion and danger, about what happens when wild instincts awaken inside the walls of a home. He wasn't just a victim. He was a reminder that even love, when it reaches into the heart of nature, carries risks we can never fully control. It was the morning of July 17th, 2006 in Salem Township, Pennsylvania. Sandra Piovesan, 50 years old, had entered the pen like she had done countless times before. To her, this wasn't just a cage, it was a sanctuary. Inside lived her beloved wolf-dog hybrids, 9 of them, each a massive, beautiful, dangerous crossbreed of wild and domestic blood. She loved them with a devotion few understood. But what Sandra didn't know was that she had just stepped into a trap. They had changed. Over the past year, the animals had grown more agitated, more territorial, more unpredictable. One of the older wolves had been torn apart by the others, but Sandra chalked it up to natural pack behavior. She believed she could manage them, control them. After all, she'd raised them for nearly a decade. Sandra had built them a playground, an odd mix of plastic igloos, balls, and a child's playhouse scattered across the dirt. To her, it was enrichment. To them, it was territory, dominance, survival. None of the animals had been spayed or neutered, and over the years, litters of pups had come and gone, all raised inside that enclosure, and all without proper oversight. She didn't hold a license from the Pennsylvania Game Commission. Instead, she used basic dog licenses as a workaround, legal on paper, but reckless in practice. Neighbors complained about the smell, the noise, the rumors of unvaccinated animals, about the roadkill Sandra sometimes dragged in to feed them. People were scared. They kept their distance. They knew something wasn't right. But Sandra, she saw herself as their protector, their mother, their alpha. That morning, she stepped into the cage for the last time. When her daughter, Crystal, showed up later that day for breakfast, she sensed something was wrong. Sandra hadn't answered her calls. She wasn't picking up. So Crystal went to the house, pushed through the yard, and walked toward the enclosure. And what she saw shattered her world. Sandra's body lay motionless on the ground, torn and bloodied, surrounded by the very creatures she had loved. The grass was stained red. Her wounds were deep, bite marks, claw gashes. She had bled out alone inside the pen. State police responded quickly, but even from outside the enclosure, the danger was clear. The hybrids stalked along the fence line, eyes fixed, muscles tense. They moved together, like hunters. It was as if they weren't guarding Sandra's body, but claiming it. There was no choice. Authorities tranquilized the animals and later euthanized them all. It was the only way to recover Sandra's remains safely. The autopsy was grim but conclusive. She had died from the injuries inflicted by her own pets. People who knew Sandra weren't surprised. Heartbroken, yes, but not shocked. They had warned her, pleaded with her, but she always insisted that the animals were misunderstood, not monsters. Brian Gallagher, one of her closest friends, believed that the attack had been triggered by a shift in pack hierarchy. Maybe one of the wolves tried to take control. Maybe they all did. And in that moment, Sandra was no longer the caretaker, but the challenge. She didn't stand a chance. Her death sent shockwaves through the town, through the state, through every quiet neighborhood where someone might be keeping a wild animal behind a flimsy fence. It was a brutal reminder. No matter how much love you pour into them, some creatures aren't meant to be pets. They're not ours to control.
Mai chị Trung chưa? Hả? Chị Trung, không đi. Qua nè. Ok luôn.
It was just after dawn in the quiet farmlands of Sukhothai province, Thailand, when the sound of distant trumpeting broke the morning calm. For most locals, that sound was familiar. The call of elephants grazing nearby, a normal part of life in a country where these majestic giants are symbols of peace and spirituality. But on that February morning in 2019, the sound came with something darker. When villagers followed the noise toward a nearby cornfield, they stumbled upon a devastating sight. The lifeless body of a man face down in the dirt, his body marked by deep bruises and massive injuries. A few meters away stood a lone elephant, towering and still, its massive frame streaked with mud. The man on the ground wasn't a stranger. He was the animal's caretaker, its mahout, its friend, its owner. For more than a decade, the 38-year-old man had lived side by side with that elephant. He had raised the bull since it was young, a distinctive animal with only one tusk, and the two had been inseparable. Together, they had built something beautiful, a sanctuary, a safe space where elephants rescued from logging or tourist exploitation could live peacefully. The man wasn't just a caretaker, he was a protector, someone who dedicated his life to giving these animals freedom and dignity. But even devotion has limits when nature reawakens. On that morning, he took the elephant out to graze in a nearby field, something he had done countless times before. Only this time, he went without his ankus, the small hook used by mahouts to guide and control elephants. Maybe he trusted his animal completely, or maybe he believed their bond was enough. But that decision, one small act of faith, would prove fatal. For reasons no one will ever fully understand, the elephant turned on him. In a flash, the gentle grazing session became an attack. The 10-year-old bull charged, slamming the man to the ground and trampling him repeatedly in a frenzy of power and confusion. The struggle ended almost as quickly as it began. When rescuers arrived, all they could do was confirm what everyone already feared. The sanctuary's founder had been killed by the very animal he had dedicated his life to saving. Police reports described the scene in stark terms: a cornfield, a crushed body, and an elephant standing guard, refusing to leave its fallen handler's side. It wasn't rage that filled the air, it was something else. Witnesses said the animal appeared agitated, restless, as if it didn't understand what had just happened. The man's wife later told authorities that her husband had been working with the elephant since it was a baby. He raised it with love, she said. He never used force, it trusted him. But elephants, especially bulls, are unpredictable, capable of deep affection one moment and explosive aggression the next. Even trained elephants can be triggered by heat, mating season, or stress. The tragedy struck a deep chord across Thailand. It was the third elephant-related death in the country that week alone, following two separate incidents, one involving a monk and another a woman killed by wild elephants near Hua Hin. To many, it was a grim reminder of how fragile the relationship between humans and elephants truly is. Thailand reveres elephants as national treasures, symbols of strength, wisdom, and peace. But for mahouts and handlers, living with these creatures means walking a fine line between reverence and risk. Around 3,500 domesticated elephants live alongside people in sanctuaries and villages, while another 300 wild elephants roam freely in protected parks. Each year, the boundaries between them blur a little more, and sometimes those blurred lines turn deadly.
A man has been mauled to death by a lion at his family home in the Eastern Czech Republic. Michal Prasek kept the 9-year-old big cat and another lioness for breeding in homemade enclosures in his backyard.
It was March 5th, 2019, in the village of Zdechov, tucked away in the hills of Eastern Czech Republic. The air was still, but behind the walls of a private property, something horrific had already happened. Inside a homemade enclosure, Michal Prasek, just 34 years old, lay lifeless, his body torn apart. His killer? Not a stranger, not a thief, but something far more chilling, his own pet lion. Michal wasn't just known in the village, he was feared. While most people in Zechov kept dogs or cats, Michal chose lions. Yes, lions. Full-grown, apex predators he housed in backyard cages built with his own hands. He claimed it was for breeding. The locals called it madness, and for years they begged someone, anyone, to do something, but no one could stop him. He bought the male lion from Slovakia in 2016, then a lioness 2 years later. Despite the constant complaints from terrified neighbors, despite mounting fines from the authorities, Michal kept his lions, fed them, walked them on leashes through the village like oversized pets. People looked on in disbelief. Parents pulled their kids inside, and still, nothing changed. In one shocking incident, a cyclist collided with Michal's lioness while she was out for one of those infamous walks. The cyclist was injured badly enough to need hospital care, yet the event was dismissed as nothing more than a traffic accident. The message was clear. Michal wasn't giving up his lions, and the law wasn't strong enough to force his hand. Officials tried. They cited him for building illegal enclosures, breeding without permits. But without evidence of animal cruelty, and without a safe place to relocate the lions, they were trapped in a legal deadlock. And Michal, he knew it. He refused them entry, shut the gates, shut the world out. Then came that Tuesday morning. At around 7 a.m., Michal's father approached the enclosure. What he saw would haunt him forever. His son's body, bloodied and motionless, was sprawled inside the lion's cage. The door was locked from the inside. That meant Michael had entered voluntarily. No one knows why. Maybe it was routine, maybe he thought he was safe. Maybe he truly believed that after years of raising these lions, they saw him as more than prey. He was wrong. When police arrived, the decision was brutal but unavoidable. The lions, especially the male, were dangerous, and Michael's lifeless body was still inside the cage. There was no other way. Both animals were shot and killed so authorities could reach him. A doctor on scene confirmed what everyone feared. Michael was dead. And then came the tragic twist. The lioness, she was pregnant. The village reacted with a strange mix of grief and grim relief. Michael was gone, and so were the lions. For the first time in years, parents didn't have to worry about a predator strolling past their child's school. But at what cost? Mayor Tomasz Kokurek said what many were already thinking, that maybe, just maybe, this tragedy would force the government to wake up. The Czech Republic had become a quiet hotspot for illegal wildlife smuggling and lax enforcement. And now, someone was dead. Michael Prasek paid the ultimate price for his obsession. He believed he could tame nature, control it, build fences around it. But nature has no master. And in the end, the lions didn't forget who they were. Neither will anyone else.
In dieser Folge wenden sich die 3 zahmen Löwen eines Mannes gegen ihn. Er hat sie von klein auf großgezogen, bis ins Erwachsenenalter aufgezogen und mit ihnen Tausende von Menschen in seiner Lodge in Südafrika unterrichtet.
It was supposed to be just another ordinary afternoon at Mehalaview Lion Lodge, the kind of quiet, golden day that had defined Leon Van Bilgen's life for decades. To the tourists and locals who knew him, Leon wasn't just a game lodge owner, he was the Lion Man. The 70-year-old South African had raised his 3 lions, Rambo, Katrin, and Nikita, from tiny cubs. He bottle-fed them, slept beside them, and often called them his children. To him, they weren't wild animals. They were family. But on one hunting afternoon in 2019, that bond would be tested in the most brutal way imaginable. The story begins with something simple: a broken fence inside the lion enclosure. Leon walked into the pen, tools in hand, confident that his beloved lions would understand. After all, they'd been together their whole lives. He moved calmly, turning his back for just a moment to fix a section of wire. That single moment changed everything. Without warning, one of the lions lunged. In an instant, the calm of the African air was shattered by the sound of claws and teeth sinking into flesh. Leon never had the chance to react. The massive lion clamped its jaws around his neck, an instinct older and stronger than any human bond. By the time nearby lodge staff heard the commotion and ran to help, the scene was beyond saving. Leon's body lay motionless inside the enclosure, his beloved lions pacing in circles around him, their fur stained with his blood. Emergency crews could do nothing. The only way to reach him was to put down the very animals he had raised, fed, and loved like his own. Witnesses said it looked as though the lions were protecting his body, not attacking it anymore, just staying close, as if confused by what had happened. But the truth was already written. The man who spent his life teaching others about the majesty and divinity of lions had been taken by the very creatures he adored. Friends called it a great loss for everyone. His daughter, Leonette, said her father left this earth because of his children. To her, it wasn't just a tragic accident, it was the price of a love too deep, too trusting, too human. "My dad raised those lions," she said. "He would sleep with them. He believed it was his duty from God." In the days after his death, videos of Leon resurfaced online, smiling beside the lions, feeding them by hand, teaching wide-eyed visitors about coexistence between man and beast. But the comments beneath those videos took on a darker tone. People began to wonder, can you ever truly tame something wild? Can love rewrite nature's law?
70-year-old Terry Garner was last seen last Wednesday heading out to feed his hogs. After a few hours, a family member went out to check on Garner, only to find his dentures in his hog enclosure.
On the morning of September 26, 2012, Terry Vance Garner walked out to feed his hogs, just like he had done countless times before. It was a routine part of his life, a quiet ritual on the farm he loved. The same steps, the same path, the same animals. But this time, he never came back. Hours passed, and his absence began to weigh heavy on his family. Something was wrong. Terry was reliable, predictable, and above all else, he was devoted to those animals. So when he didn't return, a sinking feeling set in. They went looking for him, and what they found was beyond comprehension. In the middle of the hog pen, there was no sign of Terry, only fragments, bits of torn clothing, blood in the dirt, a pair of dentures half buried near the mud, and scattered remains. The rest of him was gone. The hogs, massive, some weighing over 700 pounds, moved around calmly, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something horrific. Terry Vance Garner wasn't just another farmer. He was a 69-year-old Vietnam War veteran, known in his Oregon community as kind-hearted and hard-working. But behind his gentle demeanor lived the scars of war. He suffered from PTSD. The battlefield had left its mark. But he'd found peace in the slow rhythm of farm life. The animals, the soil, the air, they were therapy. They gave him something the war never could: calm. His older brother, Michael, described him as compassionate. Even after being bitten by one of the hogs, an attack that happened after he accidentally stepped on a piglet, Terry didn't retaliate. He spared the animal. That was who he was. But pigs, even domesticated ones, are not harmless. They are strong, intelligent, and omnivorous. And when they're agitated or hungry, they are more than capable of violence. With jaws powerful enough to crush bone, they can turn deadly without warning. When the authorities arrived at the scene, they were shaken. The enclosure where Terry had spent years caring for his animals had become the site of his violent end. But how did it happen? There were theories. Maybe Terry had a medical emergency, a heart attack perhaps, collapsed in the pen, helpless, vulnerable. The hogs, confused or curious, could have overwhelmed him. That was one possibility. But there was another, a darker one. What if the pigs hadn't waited for him to fall? What if they'd knocked him down? What if something spooked them and instinct took over? What if, in a flash of fear or frenzy, they turned on him? The case was so bizarre that foul play wasn't entirely ruled out. District Attorney Paul Frazier admitted the situation was difficult to explain. There was no clear sign of struggle, no witnesses, no definitive cause of death. The remains that were left were too few. The local pathologist couldn't determine how Terry had died or even when. The family hoped for answers, but there were none. The case was sent to a forensic anthropologist at the University of Oregon for further analysis. But time passed, and clarity never came. What happened in those final moments, whether it was a tragic accident, a medical collapse, or something more violent, remained a mystery. And so the Garner family was left with not just grief, but something far worse: uncertainty. How do you mourn someone when you don't even know how they died? Terry's life, shaped by war and healed by nature, ended in the very place he sought refuge. The same animals that gave him comfort may have, in the end, betrayed him. It was supposed to be just another quiet morning at Vienna's Schönbrunn Zoo, one of Europe's oldest and most beloved animal sanctuaries. The air was still, the public gates not yet open, and behind the scenes 39-year-old Gerd Cole began his daily routine, caring for the animals he'd devoted his life to. He had worked there since 1998, known among his colleagues as patient, meticulous, and deeply affectionate toward the creatures under his care. But that morning, the bond he thought he shared with one young elephant would take a fatal turn. The elephant's name was Abu, a nearly 4-year-old bull Cole had cared for since its birth. Their relationship had been one of trust and familiarity. Cole had raised Abu from a calf, feeding him, bathing him, and guiding him through training. But that day, something shifted. After a routine morning shower, as Cole moved to the side of the enclosure, the calm familiarity turned into sudden chaos. Without warning, Abu lunged, pinning him against the concrete wall of the enclosure. In an instant, the gentle giant's immense weight became a deadly force. Witnesses later described the attack as brutally fast. A flash of movement, a cry for help, and then silence. Abu's tusks struck with terrifying precision, impaling Cole before anyone could intervene. By the time colleagues reached him, it was already too late. The zookeeper who had once been the elephant's caretaker was now its victim. Outside, visitors had no idea of the horror unfolding inside the enclosure. Police and paramedics rushed to the scene, but there was nothing to be done. Cole was pronounced dead on sight, his life taken by the very animal he'd raised like family. A colleague who witnessed the attack collapsed from shock, unable to comprehend how a creature so familiar could turn so violently in a single heartbeat. For those who worked alongside him, Cole's death was almost unthinkable. He had been there for nearly a decade, one of the zoo's most trusted hands. Abu wasn't a wild-caught elephant, but one born and raised in captivity, one who had known human care from the moment it opened its eyes. Yet instinct, primal and uncontrollable, had awakened in an instant. The zoo closed its elephant exhibit that day, draped in silence and disbelief. The tragedy came just days after another sorrow in the same herd, the death of Jumbo, the zoo's oldest elephant at 46. Perhaps Abu was reacting to the stress of loss, perhaps something deeper, a surge of confusion or dominance common in young male elephants reaching adolescence. No one could say for sure. All that remained was a haunting truth. Even after centuries of domestication and training, nature's raw power still lived within these magnificent animals. And it wasn't an isolated story. Across the world, similar tragedies echoed in eerie parallels. In England, at the Port Lympne Wildlife Park, another devoted keeper, Darren Cockrell, was found crushed to death in 2005 by a female elephant named La Petite, one he had cared for lovingly since her arrival from Austria. Despite years of experience, his trust in her gentleness proved fatal. The park's philosophy encouraged close physical bonding between humans and animals, a practice that blurred the line between affection and danger. In the aftermath of Gerd Cole's death, the Vienna Zoo remained haunted by questions. Could it have been prevented? Was Abu grieving? Or was it simply nature reasserting itself, reminding humanity of its boundaries? The zookeeper's colleagues mourned him as both a victim and a symbol of compassion's peril, of trust's fragility, of the eternal tension between man and beast.
Switching gears now to Lehigh County, we have new details in that bizarre investigation after a pet snake wrapped itself around its owner's neck. You remember that story? Well, the 28-year-old owner has died.
It was a quiet evening on August 25, 2017, in Church Crookham, Hampshire. 31-year-old Dan Brandon was upstairs in his bedroom. Downstairs, his mother Babs was cooking dinner. The air smelled of spices and something warm and familiar. Nothing seemed out of place until they heard it. A crash. It was sudden, heavy, and sharp, like something had fallen hard. But no scream followed. After all, Dan's room was full of glass tanks, equipment, and enclosures. Maybe something had simply been knocked over. Dan Brandon had always been a little different. He wasn't just a pet owner, he was a devotee of the unusual. 10 snakes, 12 tarantulas. Creatures that made most people shudder, but to Dan, they were companions. He'd been raising reptiles since he was 15, 16 years of experience. He understood their habits, their needs, their temperaments. To many, it seemed reckless, but to Dan, it was a lifestyle. But among all his creatures, there was one that stood out. Tiny, an African rock python stretching 8 feet long, thick, muscular, and immensely powerful. Dan had raised her since she was small enough to wrap around his fingers. He called her his baby, often cradling her like a pet dog. But Tiny was no dog. African rock pythons are among the largest snakes in the world. Non-venomous, yes, but killers by design. They wrap their bodies around their prey, tighten with every breath, and squeeze the life out. Dan knew this. He respected this. In recent months, he'd even stopped placing Tiny around his neck. She had hissed at him occasionally, coiled defensively, even faked a strike once or twice. At 7:15, Babs called up to let Dan know dinner was ready. No answer. She called again. Still nothing. She asked her husband Derek to check on him. Derek went up the stairs, knocked once, then slowly pushed the bedroom door open, and what he found stopped him cold. Dan was lying face down on the floor, motionless. His body was cold to the touch. Panic erupted. Babs ran in behind, her eyes darting to the glass enclosures. Then she noticed it. Tiny's vivarium was empty. she was gone. Paramedics were called immediately. Dan was pronounced dead at the scene. His beloved python was eventually found, coiled tightly under a box in the corner of the room. An inquest was launched, desperate to answer a single, horrifying question. Did the snake kill him? Pathologist Dr. Adnan Al-Bad's findings were chilling. Dan had died from asphyxiation. There were hemorrhages behind one eye, blood vessels ruptured in his face and lungs, but no puncture wounds, no scratches, no broken bones, and no signs of a violent struggle. If Tiny had wrapped around Dan, she hadn't attacked him in a frenzy. She hadn't bitten, she hadn't fought. The theory formed like a shadow creeping under a locked door. Maybe she hadn't meant to kill him. Maybe it wasn't aggression at all. Coroner Andrew Bradley concluded the death was accidental. Tiny might have coiled around Dan, not out of hostility, but out of fear, or even routine behavior. Pythons don't feel affection the way dogs or cats might. They act on instinct, hunger, threat, movement. And sometimes, tragically, those instincts can misfire. Reptile expert Professor John Cooper examined Tiny and found no evidence of struggle on her body, no torn skin, no defensive wounds. If Dan had tried to pull her off, she hadn't resisted. Perhaps he never had the chance. He would have known what to do. He'd done it before, but maybe this time he was caught off guard. Maybe he passed out too quickly. Maybe the trust he had in Tiny clouded his reaction. No one really knows. Some experts still aren't convinced Tiny was the cause. The evidence wasn't definitive, but for Dan's parents, for his friends, for anyone who's ever looked into the eyes of an animal and believed love was enough, it didn't matter. Dan was gone.
The beast landed on Kellyanne in one smooth bound. The air in Kelly's lungs whooshed out of her as almost 400 pounds rammed her to the ground. And by the time there was air in her lungs again to scream, Teddy had already had his jaws sunk into her shoulder.
It was October 4th, 2009 in Ross Township, Pennsylvania. In a steel and concrete cage tucked away behind a house on Dogwood Lane, a predator was waiting. Kellyanne, a 37-year-old mother of two, had done this routine countless times before. Feed the animals, clean the cages, make sure everything was in order. It was second nature to her. After all, she wasn't just any animal lover, she was devoted. She and her husband Michael had filled their home with a breathtaking, some might say alarming, collection of exotic creatures. Lions, tigers, cougars, leopards, even reptiles and Old English bulldogs. But there was one animal that stood out, a 350-pound black bear named Teddy. Teddy wasn't a new addition. The Walls family had bought him back in 2000, raised him, cared for him, fed him. To Kellyanne, Teddy was more than a bear. He was part of the family. That morning, Kellyanne did what she always did. She stepped into the 15 by 15-foot enclosure, trying her usual trick, tossing dog food to one side of the cage to distract Teddy while she cleaned the other. It had worked every time before, but not this time. This time, something was different. Whether it was the season, October, when bears begin to feel the primal pull of hibernation, or something else entirely, Teddy snapped. In an instant, the animal Kellyanne had cared for over 9 years transformed from companion to killer. He lunged. He attacked. The scene turned violent and chaotic, and her children saw it all. Screaming, they ran for help, pounding on the door of a neighbor, Scott Caston, a schoolteacher. At first, Scott thought it was some sort of wild bear attack, but when he realized the horror unfolding just next door, that it was Teddy, he didn't hesitate. He grabbed his .357 Magnum and rushed toward the Walls property. What he saw was pure terror. Teddy was on top of Kellyanne, who wasn't moving. Scott called out, tried to distract the bear, but Teddy turned his attention toward him. In that split second, faced with a choice between freezing or acting, Scott pulled the trigger. One shot to the head. The bear collapsed, dead. He ran to Kellyanne, bloodied, broken, still. He called 911, desperate for help, but it was too late. Kellyanne Walls died there, in the very cage she had entered with love and trust. The news sent shockwaves through the community. People who had once visited the Walls home to see the majestic animals, who brought their kids to marvel at lions and tigers just beyond steel bars, now recoiled in disbelief. A place once filled with fascination had become the site of a nightmare. In the days that followed, deeper questions rose. It was discovered that Michael Walz's permits to own and display exotic animals had expired over a year before the attack. Still, nothing had been done. Inspectors had found no serious violations. The cages were secure. The paperwork? Just a formality, they said, but no one could ignore what had happened. Not now. At Kellyanne's funeral, mourners packed the New Covenant World Outreach Church. The people of Ross Township came together not just to grieve, but to try to make sense of it all. How could a woman so loving, so passionate about animals meet such a fate? How could a creature she nurtured for nearly a decade become the very thing that took her away? It was a calm morning in Limpopo, South Africa, the kind that West Mathewson loved most. The air was warm, the sky stretched endlessly overhead, and the faint sound of the bush surrounded the lion tree top lodge where he lived, worked, and spent every day among the creatures he called his family. To the world, he was a respected conservationist, a man who fought to save animals from exploitation and canned hunting, where lions are bred and shot for sport. But to those who knew him personally, he was simply Uncle West, a man who believed that love, patience, and understanding could bridge the gap between human and beast. Every morning, West would walk side by side with his two white lionesses, Demi and Tanner Magnificent, muscular creatures he had rescued and raised by hand. To outsiders, it seemed unthinkable. A man strolling casually through the bush with two apex predators padding silently at his side. But to West, it was normal. It was trust. It was love. That trust would cost him his life. On a quiet morning in 2020, West took the lions for another of their routine walks. His wife, Jill, followed close behind in their car as she always did, watching protectively as her husband led the two great cats along the dirt trail. For years, this ritual had played out peacefully, but this time, something was different. Without warning, one of the lionesses turned not on the other but on West. There was no growl, no signal, just an explosion of movement, claws, muscle, and instinct all at once. Before Gil could even react, her husband was on the ground. The lioness had gone for his groin, and the attack was over almost as quickly as it began. Gil tried everything, honking the car horn, shouting, desperate to distract the lions. But it was too late. By the time she reached him, West was still. The animals he'd rescued, protected, and loved like his own children had taken his life. To this day, no one knows exactly what triggered the attack. Some believe the lionesses were playing too roughly. Others say a flash of dominance between them set off a fatal reaction. But everyone agrees on one thing even after decades of experience. Even with animals raised from birth, the wild can never truly be tamed. Demi and Tanner were later tranquilized and relocated to another facility. The family insisted they not be killed. West would never have wanted that. He had always said his lions deserved freedom, and in a way, his death ensured they would one day return to the wild he loved so deeply. His family was shattered. 4 sons, 6 grandchildren, and a wife who had watched everything unfold from just a few feet away. Yet, amid the heartbreak, they spoke not of anger, but of peace. He died living his dream, their family statement read. He died being in nature and with his lions. It's a story that feels both beautiful and brutal. The tale of a man who dedicated his life to saving predators, only to be claimed by the very nature he sought to protect. West Mathewson believed in harmony between man and beast, but as his final moments proved, that line between love and danger can vanish in an instant.